Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, pawning off old English folk song lyrics as your own, or else a scrappy upstart, pawning off lyrics that you found in a Reddit thread as your own, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of February 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Felix who drove a vintage GMC Jimmy with a lift kit and who was always trying to sell you NyQuil that he claimed were air quote downers. And old Felix actually is who he is this week. Whoops. And old Felix would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. Bandzoogle is one of those nice things. It powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time to head on over there and do that. I really appreciate you. If you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, there's still a couple ways that you could help out the show for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store. Or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope that you dig this week's show. Our guest this week leads a group that has built a career and following out of Chapel Hill, North Carolina for the last decade plus. Sarah Shook and the Disarmers play a unique brand of roots music that pulls equally from Hank Williams, Elliot Smith, and the Sex Pistols. They've recorded for Chicago's Bloodshot Records. No Depression said of the 2018 album, Years, "This ain't no country for hipsters or posers." Rolling Stone said of the same album, "Everyone plays with fire and purpose." And Vice says of the group, "Equal parts Joan Jett and Hank Williams, Shook and the Disarmers are pioneers, finding a space that allows them to marry country and punk without falling victim to the corniness that can come from trying too hard to make one sound like the other." I caught up with Sarah Shook on the phone a few weeks ago, and I hope you dig our chat. Sarah Shook, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You grew up, I guess, in Rochester, but it also sounds like you grew up all over the place. What did music look like in your household growing up?
I grew up in a very conservative, evangelical Christian household, and we weren't allowed to listen to music unless it was classical or worship music. So even contemporary Christian music, which a lot of my peers were listening to, was off limits for me and my siblings. So I grew up with a lot of Vivaldi and Bach. My parents had one of those like little wooden cassette tape organizers, and they had some kind of collection of sort of all the great composers, classical composers. And I didn't start really listening to, normal music until I was in my late teens and I got my first job. And I was working as a cashier at Wegmans in Geneva, New York. And my coworkers were all high schoolers and they all went to school together. So it was kind of like being the new kid. And when they found out that I had, no experience with music that they could relate to in any way, they started sneaking me CDs to smuggle into my house and listen to after my parents went to sleep.
What were some of those illicit contraband CDs you remember the most first coming in?
Yeah, the first batch was Belle and Sebastian, Tiger Milk, and the Decemberists EP, and some Elliot Smith. And with everything that came through, Elliot Smith was definitely my favorite.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it's funny because it's funny that you were listening to that classical music, and of all the kind of indie rock that you could hear, he has so many kind of classical influences on him.
Yeah. Yep.
So maybe he was your way in. I'm sure, being restricted that much as a kid looking back, I'm sure you look back and you think that was difficult. Do any parts of you think like, oh, that's pretty cool that I got some Vivaldi in there though too?
Yeah, for sure. If I could have changed things at the time, I would have. But in retrospect, I'm actually really grateful that it worked out that way. I feel like listening to music and experiencing music that way first kind of gave me an advantage in a way. I didn't have any of the musical terminology that I have today to kind of describe like what I was doing, especially when I was like around 8 or 9 and I started writing songs. I didn't know what a chord progression was, or I didn't know what a bridge or a chorus were. So I feel like listening to a lot of classical and having that be my first experience, I learned a lot by ear, and I feel like there were a lot of connections that were made in my little kid head that was like, oh, this and this sound good together, and these things, not so much. Sometimes a little bit of dissonance is good, but I feel like all of those initial sort of neurological pathways that I started connecting when I was little were all intuitive. And it was really learning by trial and error.
Do you find yourself as you get older, now you do this is your gig, this is your job. Do you find yourself trying to almost unlearn some of the stuff that you have learned to get back to that place of just listening to whether it sounds good or not and having that simple of a criteria again?
Honestly, no, but mostly because I have not I haven't pursued any kind of secondary education with music very intentionally. I felt like I didn't want to know too much,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. I have a friend who has a master's in music composition, and he started out as a songwriter. That was kind of like his that was his foray into the music realm. And he always says, he's just like, I know too much, and it's taken all of the fun and the spontaneity out of it, because now when I hear like a musical piece, I'm analyzing it instead of enjoying it, and I'm like, see, that's exactly what I don't want.
Yes.
So I've kept my knowledge of music very basic and very rudimentary. I don't read music. There's still, I'm sure there's a world of things out there that I could learn if I want to. And at some point, maybe that will change. But for now, I really like learning by ear and taking that route.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the best stuff comes out of that. But hold on, it seems in a way I'm kind of interested in this middle period. You talk about when you were listening to classical music as a kid, and then when you're, I don't know, 17, 18, 19, this is when you're slanging milk down at the Wegmans and your friends kind of turn you on to this illicit stuff. But you said kind of in the middle there, you had picked up an instrument and started to write. So what did that look like? That's very interesting to me, because you weren't listening to any secular music, weren't listening obviously to any real singer-songwriter music. Like, what did that stuff look like then, or sound like rather?
So the early days, I remember being 8 or 9, and that was when I wrote my, quote unquote first song. My parents had an upright piano in our hallway that kind of served as a catch-all. It was just, covered with clutter. And it wasn't very well taken care of. Nobody in the family is a professional pianist by any means. But it was there, and I had ideas. I'm sure, considering my upbringing, my first song was probably about Jesus or climbing trees. um, but it was a combination of the things that I was listening to at home and the things that I was experiencing, like in a live setting at church on Sunday mornings. Just again, like trial and error, playing different notes and seeing what sounded good together, what complemented each other, learning how different combinations of notes can evoke feelings. And that was just absolutely intriguing to me. I was obsessed with the fact that, like you can play a G chord and that makes you feel one thing. And then if you play an A minor chord, it feels totally different. And then on top of that, at the time, I didn't even know what I was playing were chords, much less what their names were. So it was very much in the early days, it was very much like exploring a new frontier. And in my teens, a friend of mine from church loaned me an acoustic guitar. I had decided I wanted to play something that I could take outside with me, because I was an outside kid that spent more time in trees than on the ground, I think. So I started teaching myself guitar when I was, I think, 16 or 17. And my parents bought one of those giant posters that you hang on your wall that has, like all the sort of chord shapes you need to know to get started.
Yeah. The chord wheel or whatever.
Yes.
So yeah. When did you go ahead?
All of this was also in lieu of actual lessons, because my mom had tried unsuccessfully to get me to take music lessons. When I started writing stuff and, poking around on the piano, she signed me up for piano lessons. And I think I had 2, and my teacher was so mean that I told my mom, I was just like, I'm not going back. Like, I'm not,
Yes.
this woman is just mean, and I'm literally 8 years old. Like, who's mean to an 8-year-old?
Right.
I don't
Right.
got time for this. Like, I'll teach myself. And then she also tried to sign me up for violin lessons. And the teacher actually, like, within the first couple minutes of this lesson, I didn't, and I'm brand new. Apparently, I didn't have my feet in the right position. And she took the bow out of my hand and hit me over the head with it. And I like set down the violin very carefully and just walked out the door and literally sat in the driveway till my mom came and picked me up. And she's like, what happened with this one? And I was like, she's mean. I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
she hit me with a bow. I'm like 8.
Well, all in all, though, I mean, it sounded like you. This is all a good thing because it led to a place where this kind of autodidactic place where you end up with your own voice sooner than a lot of people normally would.
Yeah, I think so.
When do you start to listen to the type of music? So you kind of, the first secular music that hits you is kind of like this indie singer songwriter stuff with Bell and Sebastian and a man after my own heart, Elliot Smith. When do you start to? When does like American country music vernacular kind of enter into your world?
So in my teens, shortly after kind of still in the beginning of teaching myself guitar, looking at a poster on your wall that has chord shapes like that can only take you so far. And like strum patterns, those are things that like I had to pick out of thin air. And there was some like worship and praise music that my parents allowed. There's a really prominent worship group in Australia, Hillsong. I think it's called Hillsong. My parents used to let us listen to that stuff, and that was a little more contemporary stuff. So I could pick out on guitar like what a strum pattern. It might not have been exact, but it was similar to like what I'd heard on like this praise music. And I remember being, this was in Western New York that I was learning guitar, and my family moved to North Carolina when I was, we were back in New York at that point. Yeah, we made a big circle. So we moved from New York to North Carolina to PA to New York and then back to North Carolina.
Okay.
So by the time I got to North Carolina, I had been writing songs for years, but I had no plans of doing anything with them. It was just something that I did that I found very interesting and satisfying. And I started dating somebody, and he had like a small but really quality collection of like classic country greats. So like Buck Owens and Kitty Wells and Wanda Jackson and Charlie Pride. And this one of the first times we were hanging out, we were sitting on his porch and we had the door to the house open, and he put on a Johnny Cash record. And I was like, what is this? And he's like, well, this is Johnny Cash. I was like, well, what is it? Like, what kind of music is it? And he's like, well, this is country. And I was like, this is what I've been doing. This sound is like this kind of like 1-4-5, like kind of shuffling feeling. Like, this is what I'm doing. This is a whole thing. And I was so excited because I was just like, yes, oh my God, I finally found like my group. I fit in somewhere. This is perfect. And yeah, it was a very, very exciting time. I got a very thorough crash course in all the country greats, and it wouldn't be for another couple years until I discovered punk, and didn't start with Green Day. Like, my intro to punk was like the Sex Pistols and X-Ray Specs and Germs and Bad Brains. So it's funny because I feel like I am just going to spend the rest of my life playing catch up on music. It's like you got to start at the beginning of every genre and then work your way through the decades.
And in the same way that you felt like you had uncovered kindred spirits with the country music, you kind of felt in a similar way about the punk?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember when I was a little kid, before my dad had his salvation experience, he was a guitarist in rock and roll bands.
Oh, okay.
And he felt like when he got saved or whatever, that God asked him to like give up playing guitar.
Oh,
Which I, even as a little kid, I was just like, why would, what? That doesn't make any sense. Um, and at some point, but I think around the age where I started teaching myself piano, my dad had said he was gonna get an electric guitar. And I was so fucking excited because I'd heard like good electric guitar tone on the radio on
hmm.
something. And so I thought he was gonna have, like, so he gets this Fender um and plugs it in, and it has this like perfectly clean tone. And I remember just being like, that's not what an electric guitar is supposed to sound like. It's supposed to be loud and growly and fuzzy and reverby. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing like getting a kid a toy that they think they know what it looks like off TV, and then bringing it to them and it looks nothing like it, and their disappointment is accusatory towards old man and mom. Uh, wow. So, and was there anything of the you've kind of been talking about a musical kinship that you had with those two musical genres. Was there also sort of an attitudinal and cultural kinship that you felt with them as well, or was it mainly musical?
I feel like both country and punk come from being at a natural disadvantage in life. Um, I grew up poor. My mom stayed home to homeschool my older sister and me and my younger sibling, and my dad was the breadwinner. Like, so we had a single income, and you know, it's weird. Like, parents don't really talk about money, but even as a kid, like, you're just like, yeah, I can sense that, like, we don't have what other families have. Like, there is this certain there's like a very specific kind of unspoken stress, I think, when you're like living in like below the poverty line. And my dad worked his ass off, and that's one of the things that I think about a lot, because you hear this a lot in public discourse where people have this attitude that's just like, oh, well, all you have to do is like work really hard and have a good attitude, and like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like quit complaining and do something. And it's just like, I watch my dad bust his ass every single day, every day. And like, he was a self-employed house painter. Like, you can only make so much. And when you're providing for a family, and it's not just like, a single dude living on his own. Yeah, I feel like country and punk generally come from this place of want, or of need, like not having everything that you need, I guess. And especially with country, I feel like there's a degree of resourcefulness that automatically comes with that, which is really interesting. And you read, like, you can read about like in the old days, like when there was nothing to do but like you work all day in the field, and do whatever needs to be done for the house. Like, you draw the water, you bring firewood in, like whatever. At the end of the day, like, you're sitting on your porch or you're sitting outside making whatever music you can, and figuring out how to make interesting sounds out of what you have laying around. So yeah, I feel like country is more of a like, lyrically speaking, country feels more individual. It feels like the views and the experiences of someone. And especially like old school punk, I feel like, is this much broader anger at injustice with, structural racism or sexism or classism. Like, it's like anger directed at a much larger thing. And country oftentimes is just one person, crying into their beer because their woman left them.
But because they got laid off by a bullshit boss. That's why she left
Yeah.
him. But that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that similarity between the two, and I'll add on to it there because you mentioned, of course, the resourcefulness in the attitudes of a lot of country music from back in the day. And of course, punk music, particularly the punk that you were talking about that was, hardcore coming out of the early 80s. I mean, they pioneered the DIY spirit. Do it yourself.
Yep.
Find a press that'll press your record. Start a zine. Start an all ages club at a community center where you can come and play to 100 kids and maybe make $5 a ticket,
Yep. And furthermore, like, we can't afford nice gear. So we're going to make music that it doesn't matter if you have a shitty drum kit or not.
Yes. Just be a good drummer. But you're right.
Yeah.
But they're so, at least on the surface level, you'd say, well, these seem like two pretty different groups of people here. You think like a Merle Haggard walking on the fighting side of me, kind of relatively conservative, stars in your eyes patriot. And on the other side of it, the kind of left-wing punks critical of the military industrial complex, all that. But what you're speaking to is below that kind of superficial difference, you kind of see a lot of culture that they actually share.
For sure. And, lest we forget, a lot of the early country outlaw country movement was people that, by today's standards would be considered pretty liberal.
Yes.
I mean, some of Johnny Cash's lyrics, certainly Willie Nelson. It's interesting. I think that, especially in the age that we are living in right now, like, everything is so divisive and intentionally divisive. And we're just all supposed to be addicted to this cycle of political drama. And yeah, I feel like there are a lot more things that we have in common than we don't. And most of the things that we don't have in common don't matter. There are a few that, like, it'll make or break it, but like, for the most part, we are unnecessarily against each other, I think.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Sarah talks about an intuitive way of composing by ear rather than composing by theory. And there's a wonderful poem by Kaveh Akbar that speaks to that divide between the tangible physical world and the ethereal aesthetic world. It's entitled Forfeiting My Mystique. It's a pretty long poem, so I'm going to read you about half of it. It is pretty to be sweet and full of pardon, like a flower perfuming the hands that shred it. But all piety leads to a single point, the same paradise where dead lab rats go. If you live small, you'll be resurrected with the small, a whole planet of minor gods simpering in the weeds. I don't know anyone who would kill anyone for me. As boys, my brother and I would play love, me drawing stars on the soles of his feet, him tickling my back. Then we'd play harm, him cataloging my sins to the air, me throwing him into the furniture. The algorithms for living have always been delicious and hollow, like a beetle husk in a spider's paw. Hafez said, "Fear is the cheapest room in a house, that we ought to live in better conditions." I would happily trade all my knowing for plusher carpet, higher ceilings. Some nights I force my brain to dream me Persian by listening to old home movies as I fall asleep. In the mornings, I open my eyes and spoil the seance. Am I forfeiting my mystique? All bodies become sicker bodies. This is a kind of object permanence, a curse bent around our scalps, resembling grace only at the tattered edges. It's so unsettling to feel anything but good. I wish I was only as cruel as the first time I noticed I was cruel, waving my tiny shadow over a pond to scare the copper minnows. When did music start to look like an avenue of a career for you? Because everyone kind of starts and it's a, as a hobby or something you just said that you were interested in there. At what point did it look like, hey man, this is something that I could hang my hat on this and pay my rent or my mortgage with this?
I never wanted it to be a source of income, much less my only source of income. When I first started my very first band, Sarah Shook and the Devil, my boyfriend at the time was an upright bass player. And so we started just like doing little Hank Sr. covers and having fun with it. And then, Eric Peterson, our current guitarist, joined up with us. And Phil Sullivan, who played lap steel on Sidelong and pedal steel on Years. And he also played pedal steel on Night Roamer. To me, it was always like, this is something that I do because it's cathartic for me. And I'm not very good at talking about my feelings. And it's a lot easier for me to just write a song about a situation than try to get too deep in it. It was always supposed to be a fun thing that I did to spend time with my friends. And then if we happened to play at a local bar or whatever, it was just like, I get to spend time with my friends and I get free PBR. Okay, that's great. That's all I want. And then, that band was together from about 2010 to October of 2013. And at the conclusion of that, when everything was kind of falling apart, Eric Peterson was just like, look, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what the next iteration of this group is going to be, but whatever it is, I'm sticking with you. I believe in your songwriting. I believe in you as a person. We'll figure this stuff out as we go. We'll find other musicians. We'll figure it out. And so then we put Sarah Shook and the Disarmers together in 2015. We added drums, which, the first band that I had was very Hank Sr. There was no drums. Upright bass and rhythm guitar was the rhythm section. And Eric and I had been on the same page about adding drums for a while. And, we had all these songs that we recorded independently. When we first released Sidelong, it was independent. And Bloodshot Records saw a music video and heard some of the songs somehow, and they were just like, yeah, we want to sign you guys and we want to re-release this record. We feel like it deserves more attention than it got, as a self-release. But it was interesting because before Bloodshot came along, we had this record, and Eric sent me this long email, and like he's by and large a man of few words. And he sent me this really long message, and he was just like, look, I don't know what you're doing, but we don't have merch. Like, we really don't have a record deal. We're not touring. Like, we're playing local shows here and there. Like, I need to know what your expectations are, because I want more than what we're doing right now. And I don't feel like you do. And if you do, like, I can't tell. So you need to tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
And that was just a huge wake up call. And I was just like, oh, okay, well, I had no idea he felt that way. Like, I didn't know that he wanted more out of this than I was giving. So now I know, and I fucking love Eric, and he's been with me since the beginning, and he's been a loyal friend and bandmate. I was like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. Let's give it a shot. And you know, before we released Sidelong, I was literally in the hospital, like thinking that I was dying and all of my organs were shutting down. And, you know, it was just a average run of the mill anxiety attack.
Oh, Lord.
that I'd never had before. And I was just a mess. I was like, I don't, you know, if this comes out and nothing happens and nobody hears it, I will be happier than if it comes out and it gets all kinds of attention, because I don't want attention. I don't like talking to people. I don't like people looking at me. It's hard enough standing on a stage and performing a set. And yeah, I mean, it's just I don't have ambition. I am very grateful to be in the position that I am, because I know a lot of people work really hard, and it just never works out, or it never seems to pay off. So I don't want to sound ungrateful, because I am grateful, and I know that I have a lot of privilege being where I am right now. As an introvert, it can be very difficult to navigate, you know, certain situations, and I've come a long way. And the fact that like I can sit here and talk to you as a sober person and not have to have like 3 whiskeys before I hop on this call, like that's really good progress.
I would say so.
Yeah.
Well, congrats on that and being sober. That's a good picture of how it all kind of came into place business-wise. Creatively, what did your creative process look like at the start of this, and have you changed it at all as you've gone through this, or has it kind of remained the same?
Oh, I feel like it's changed to a degree. You know, I'm not writing songs about Jesus anymore. Oh,
well, sure.
You know,
but some about climbing trees.
Yeah, I feel like there's a natural progression. One of the things that I hold very dear and feel is true is, if you want your art to improve and you want to continue getting better at what it is that you do, like, you have to grow as a person and you have to evolve as a person. You have to be willing to make mistakes and fail and realize that failure isn't the end of the world. There's a lot of like growing up that goes into it. And I feel like if you listen to Sidelong and Years and Night Roamer back to back, I feel like there's like a palpable growth, and that's really encouraging to me, because it's just like, okay, I can hear this. Like, you know, Sidelong is this wild, reckless, like no holds barred, blow the doors off country album, and Years is like a little more polished and a little more poised and like a little bit more introspective. And then I feel like Night Roamer is just like building on top of the maturity, that the growth that I experienced during the making of Years and like the touring that ensued after that. And it's great. Like I'm not setting out to ever make like a perfect record. But I am definitely setting out to make like the best record that I absolutely can, at the point in time that I am in my life.
I couldn't agree more with your larger point there, that to grow creatively, you do have to grow as a person. I think you even said just grow up as a person.
Yeah.
In my own experience with that, and I'm wondering if you felt the same thing, I actually I kind of held on to a lot of immaturity and a lot of things that I was doing in my life that were not healthy for me. I kind of held on to them almost in a totemic way, feeling like if I did grow up, that I would lose some sort of creative spark. And I use that personally as a long time for a reason to not grow up in many ways. Still got a lot of growing to do. Not saying that I don't. But did you ever feel that? Did you ever hold on to parts of yourself that you knew had to go because you felt like they were integral to a creative part of you?
To a degree, for sure. When I quit drinking, there are so many unnerving things that go along with recovery, especially in the beginning, especially in those early days. But to me, the absolute scariest thing about getting sober was like, I don't know if I am ever going to be able to write a song again. And it not necessarily because all I wrote were drinking songs, even though I wrote a great deal of drinking songs. But also because like I literally drank to achieve this sort of level of like being uninhibited enough to like sit down and write a song, because I'm not a disciplined songwriter. I write like when the spirit moves me and there's nobody else around, I'm alone. And so I was just like, well, if I can't drink, like, how am I going to get in the right headspace to write songs? And I had to like be very firm with myself and just be like, look, you have been writing songs since you were 8. You were not throwing back double whiskeys when you were 8 years old.
Yes.
Living in your super Christian parents' house. You have been writing songs longer without substances than with them. You're going to be fine. And I went through a very long time after I quit drinking where I didn't write a song. And it was really nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And then when I wrote another song, I was just like, there was such a sense of relief because it felt exactly the same way as it did when I was drinking. It's like the whole thing just came all at once, the verses, the chorus, the lyrics, the chord progression, a loose arrangement. And it was just like done in like half an hour. And I'm like, this is exactly how it was when I was drinking. I can do this. I just have to be patient.
Were there some practices or things that you had to put in place to reach that same level of inhibition without alcohol, or did it just take time and you just had to wait?
I think it just took time and I had to wait. And again, like there's no difference between that as a sober person and that as a person who was drinking. Because even when I was drinking, it was still like this sort of waiting game where I go about my life and I have friendships and relationships and I collect experiences and I make observations in my subconscious. And to me, writing a song, I feel like it happens as quickly and as completely as it does for me because it's like my subconscious just sees a moment where I'm in the right headspace to be open to it coming. And then it's just like my subconscious lines everything up and brings it to the surface. And it's all very like linear and concise. And it's like all there, just like, I just have to be I just have to be willing to like write it down and pick up my guitar and be like, yep, this goes here and this goes here.
It's such a miracle. Where does that come from?
I couldn't tell you.
I feel the same way. I mean, there's songs that I can really bang into place through sheer brute force, and they're always terrible. And then any song I write that's worth anything comes. I mean, the way that you just described that, being like the song almost being going from a subliminal to a liminal space. I mean, it's such a beautiful description, very evocative. And I just don't know. I don't know where that thing comes from, man. It's absolutely otherworldly.
Yeah, it's like a gift from the ether.
Yes. Talk to me about this new record, Night Roamer. How was the process of putting this one together, both the writing and the recording and production of it? How was this different than past efforts?
So I never write albums. I write songs, and some of them are like very clearly Disarmers songs. Some of them are really not, and I don't necessarily know what to do do with them, but like I write them and I set them to the side. And Night Roamer has brand new songs on it that I wrote in like, we recorded Night Roamer in March of 2020. So there are songs that were like, you know, maybe a couple months old when we went into the studio. And then there are songs that are much older. No Mistakes, I wrote in 2009. The first version of that song was written in 2009. Basically when we're like, okay, we're going in the studio, we're going to make an album, I sit down with like what I have, I get my list together. I try to have like 12 to 16 songs to choose from. And some of them are like very clear, like no contest, this is going on the record. And some of them is just like, this is okay, but like we need to like play it together and see what shakes out. So we started rehearsing for the record, and the very last rehearsal we had before we flew to LA to record, ran through the practice, got to the end of the practice, you know, spirits were really high, morale was through the roof. We're like, yes, okay, we got some good stuff, this is going to be awesome. And the guys were just like, well, you know, we're done and we finished early, like, do you have anything else that we could just kind of run through for fun and like blow off some steam? And I was like, yeah, I've got like a couple of songs. And so we ran through I Got This and Been Loving You. And they were just like, yeah, these should definitely be on the record. And I was like, all right, well, let's do it. It's, you know, it's a little bit of a departure, but from what we've done in the past, but you know, give a song to those dudes and they'll make something good sound.
Yeah. And then what did the recording process look like itself once you got out to Los Angeles?
There were a few days of pre-production. This record was definitely a lot different from the way that we recorded Sidelong in Years. Sidelong in Years were both 4-day long recording sessions, and it was all live. Mm-hmm. Scratch guitar and scratch lead vocals. And then this was like, you know, Night Roamer was recorded in a much more traditional fashion. So it was interesting, and I'm glad that I had that experience, and can make those sort of like comparisons. But it was cool. We recorded at Pete's studio out in LA, and you know, he has this beautiful garden area that's connected to the studio. That's just, you know, when your guitarist is like, you know, on hour 3 of like doing the stuff he's doing, you can just like literally sit down under like a lemon tree or some shit, just chill. Yeah, it was good. It was definitely interesting when we first started diving into songs. Pete wanted to sit down with just me and Eric, and me with an acoustic guitar and Eric with like an unplugged electric guitar. And he's like, just show me the songs you've got, show me the arrangements that you have. And so we just like from the word go, we're like, this is what we have. And he's like, little changes here and there, just like, oh, there's like this extra bar that really doesn't need to be in there. It's not really adding anything to the song. And we're pretty meticulous as a group too. Like we get songs pretty damn tight before we feel like we're ready to record them. So it was cool because I feel like for the most part, Pete was like, he noticed that and he was just like, yeah, there's not much that needs to be changed here, but you know, these little things will make a big difference. It was a good experience.
Did you enjoy the process of not necessarily cutting entirely live and doing it more in a traditional way? And do you think you'll record like that in the future?
You know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we're going to make another record like that or not. My preference, I think, is live. I think that there's something that is intangible, but also palpable. There's an energy, I feel like. And, you know, that's one of the strengths of this band. Like, specifically, the Disarmers are, like, we're killer live because that's, like, where our passion is. So I feel like not recording live actually really served this specific record well. I feel like Night Roamer was the perfect candidate for doing a different, like approaching it from a different angle. But you know, it just depends on what the batch of songs turns out to be for the next record. I have a feeling the next record after Night Roamer is going to be a lot more like Sidelong. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one.
Well, we will be waiting, and we appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on to The Working Songwriter. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Sarah Shook and the Disarmers' latest album is entitled Night Roamer, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.